He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, just minutes after Meghan reportedly screamed she'd take the kids and leave him for good. It began on an otherwise quiet evening in Montecito. The type of evening that, from the outside, would appear tranquil, where the soft sea breeze rustles through eucalyptus trees and distant waves lap against the California coast. But inside one of the most heavily guarded estates in the region, behind tall hedges and high security gates, something seismic was unfolding. Shouts could be heard muffled through thick glass. Movement, fast, erratic, flickered through curtain windows. That calm exterior was nothing but a fragile illusion. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince Harry had just walked out. Not figuratively. Literally. According to one eyewitness, he stormed past security, past the waiting SUVs in the driveway, and disappeared down a private pathway that cuts into the hills surrounding the estate. For a moment, no one moved. One bodyguard radioed in to confirm. Another followed at a distance. Inside the house, Meghan was said to be pacing, eyes wide, hands trembling. The look on her face was described as a mixture of fury, fear, and disbelief. The couple had fought before. Every marriage has its fractures. But this was something else. That night, the world would not yet know what happened. But something had clearly broken inside Harry. And by morning, word would leak that the Duke of Sussex had been rushed to a private Santa Barbara clinic following what insiders described as a serious panic attack, shortness of breath, dangerously elevated blood pressure, and emotional collapse. The headlines hit like a bombshell. Prince Harry hospitalized after breakdown. Meghan Markle and Prince Harry in violent argument before medical emergency. The stories painted a troubling picture of a once royal couple now teetering not just on the brink of separation, but on the edge of something darker: psychological collapse, emotional ruin, and a desperate cry for help. What had caused it? And more importantly, what would come next? This video dives deep, deeper than any tabloid headline or palace spokesperson ever could. Because this isn't just a story about a fight. It's a story about pressure, identity, betrayal, and the slow unraveling of a man who once stood as one of the most beloved members of the British royal family, now lost in a world of celebrity, lawsuits, paparazzi, and the relentless noise of American fame. And at the center of it all, a fight. A single fight that, according to insiders, changed everything. What was said in those moments behind closed doors? Why did it escalate to the point where Harry collapsed? And how did Meghan respond when the man she built an empire with, a global brand, a Netflix deal, a PR machine, suddenly became too fragile to face the world? Let's start by looking back, not just to the night of the incident, but to the slow-burning fuse that may have led to it. Because this fight didn't come out of nowhere. It was the culmination of years of emotional weight, public scrutiny, family exile, financial pressure, and perhaps most devastatingly, trust betrayed. It begins with whispers, rumors that had already begun circulating in private media circles for weeks. Leaked emails, reported sightings of legal teams, even hints that custody documents were being drafted quietly, documents which, according to sources close to the couple, Meghan may have planned to file if the marriage continued its downward spiral. When those rumors reached Harry, it triggered what some are calling the emotional tipping point. He had left everything behind for her. His family, his royal titles, his military honors, his homeland. And in return, he had built something new, something fragile, yes, but something that, until recently, he believed was his sanctuary. So imagine his shock when he discovered that the very foundation of that sanctuary was being chipped away behind his back. Sources allege that Meghan's legal team had been drawing up options for full custody of Archie and Lilibet in case things became irreconcilable. When Harry found out, not directly from her, but from a trusted confidant, it shattered something inside him. The ensuing confrontation that followed was not a casual disagreement. It was reportedly loud, vicious, and deeply personal. And it ended with Harry walking out of the house, into the dark, heart-pounding, breath-short, body-shaking. He reportedly collapsed just minutes later on the edge of their property, prompting immediate medical response from his private security detail, who feared cardiac complications or neurological symptoms. He was carried into a vehicle and rushed to the nearest facility equipped for discreet VIP medical emergencies. Inside the clinic, medical professionals stabilized him, ran diagnostics, and eventually diagnosed the episode as a severe panic attack, stress-induced, fueled by emotional trauma. They say panic attacks feel like dying. Chest constriction, Vision blurs. Skin tingles. You can't catch your breath. And for someone who already carried a lifetime of trauma, losing his mother at 12, losing his family ties as an adult, this one was a storm that had been waiting to strike. But the question that haunted everyone, including the British royals who were reportedly informed within hours, was, how did it come to this? What was going on inside Harry's world in the weeks leading up to the collapse? Had Meghan truly betrayed his trust, or was it all just a misunderstanding born out of stress, money, and media attention? Was the fight about the custody documents, or was that simply the final straw in a series of deep emotional wounds that never healed? And as he sat recovering inside that Santa Barbara clinic, what thoughts ran through Prince Harry's mind? Was he questioning his marriage? His decision to leave the royal family? His place in this new world he chose? Or worse, was he starting to regret everything? This video will walk you through every layer of that night. From the explosive argument to the quiet panic attack, to the global aftermath. It will expose the pressure that fame and fractured family bonds can place on a person, even one born into the strongest monarchy in modern history. It will pull back the curtain on a relationship that once looked like the pinnacle of modern royal romance but now appears to be collapsing under the weight of secrets, silence, and screaming behind palace-sized doors. And yet, this isn't just about drama. It's about something deeper, something many people watching can relate to: the slow corrosion of trust, the suffocating silence after a fight, and the feeling of not knowing whether the person next to you is still the person you fell in love with. This story isn't about royalty anymore. It's about being human. We're about to go deep into the cracks of a modern-day fairy tale that has seemingly fractured beyond repair. So buckle in, because the truth, as raw and emotional as it may be, deserves to be told in full. And for Prince Harry, that truth might just be his only way forward. It started hours before Harry stormed out into the darkness. Sources close to the Sussex residence reported that the day had already been tense. According to an individual familiar with the couple's household operations, Harry had spent most of the afternoon in the study, pacing between phone calls. His voice, while never loud enough to cause alarm, carried an edge: short, clipped responses that barely disguised his rising frustration. Meghan, meanwhile, had reportedly been engaged in a separate call with one of her legal consultants, a name previously linked to discrete custody filings in Southern California. By evening, something changed. A document was reportedly delivered electronically, a shared legal briefing meant for Meghan's review, but mistakenly left visible on a shared device. That document allegedly outlined strategies related to a possible separation of responsibilities between Harry and Meghan, including the question of primary custody over Archie and Lilibet. What Harry reportedly saw was not a formal filing, but a heavily annotated draft that discussed relocation rights, financial provisions, and even proposed communications protocols in case of co-parenting post-split. The moment he read it, according to someone briefed on the fallout, something in him snapped. Harry had endured years of media scrutiny, family alienation, and endless speculation about his marriage, his mental health, and his future. But what he wasn't prepared for, what he allegedly didn't see coming, was the possibility that his wife was legally preparing to cut him out of the most precious part of his world, his children. What followed inside that Montecito home is described by insiders as one of the most explosive confrontations the couple has ever had. It wasn't just shouting. It wasn't just raised voices. It was, reportedly, a full emotional collapse on both sides. Harry, fueled by disbelief and heartbreak, is said to have demanded an explanation. Meghan, caught off guard, allegedly responded with defensive anger. She insisted, again, according to accounts from those close to the situation, that the draft was exploratory, that she had no intention of filing anything without speaking to him. But to Harry, it didn't matter. The fact that she'd even entertained it, written out provisions for custody without his knowledge, felt like betrayal of the highest order. "You were going to take them from me," he allegedly shouted, according to a former household aide who spoke under condition of anonymity. "You didn't even tell me. You just planned it." Meghan, emotionally volatile in her own right, reportedly fired back with accusations of her own. That Harry had become increasingly withdrawn, irritable, erratic. That his behavior, particularly around media reports and his paranoia about palace leaks, had made her feel isolated and unprotected. One source described her words that night as chillingly final. "You've been gone from me for a long time." They reportedly hurled their grievances like weapons. Old wounds reopened. Meghan is said to have brought up his family, accusing him of still seeking their approval even after all they had done. Harry, in return, allegedly questioned her loyalty, her commitment to the life they built, to the truth they claimed to champion in their public image. The fight escalated past midnight. Household staff were dismissed early that day, a detail that now appears calculated. Whether the couple expected a confrontation or simply wanted privacy, the result was the same. No one was inside when things boiled over. At some point, Harry is believed to have thrown down the tablet where he'd first seen the document. He walked into the hallway. Meghan reportedly followed, still speaking, pleading, or arguing, it's unclear. Then he turned. Words were exchanged at the base of the staircase. After that, Harry walked out. A security camera mounted discreetly over the back gate caught him exiting barefoot, in sweatpants and a light hoodie. He walked toward the private hiking trail that was behind the property, head down, hands shaking. One bodyguard on duty, alerted by motion sensors, followed from a respectful distance, unsure if this was a temporary cool-off or something more serious. Within minutes, Harry collapsed near the foot of the trail. The bodyguard rushed in, radioed for emergency assistance. The prince was reportedly conscious but hyperventilating. He clutched his chest, gasped that he couldn't breathe. For a man who had survived military deployment, years of royal appearances, and global media pressure, this was not a man pretending. This was someone whose body had reached its limit. The medical response was swift but discreet. The Santa Barbara clinic they arrived at is known for handling celebrity clients under anonymity. When Harry was admitted, the staff knew only that he was suffering acute panic symptoms, elevated heart rate, impaired breathing, blurred vision. Blood tests, cardiac monitoring, and neurological screenings were all ordered to rule out a heart attack or stroke. But what they found pointed to a different kind of emergency, psychological, not physical. A full-blown panic attack brought on by extreme emotional stress. One staff member, who did not confirm the patient's name, later described the symptoms as classic for someone whose nervous system finally caved under a long build-up of emotional trauma. Back at the house, Meghan had gone silent. Reports vary. Some claim she made a single call to her mother, Doria Ragland. Others say she reached out to a crisis PR strategist known for handling high-profile scandals involving political spouses and celebrities. What's clear is that the tone of the household changed dramatically. Lights were dimmed. All outside communications halted. Staff were told not to speak to the media. And still, the story leaked within 12 hours. The British press ran with it first. Then American outlets followed, each scrambling to confirm whether Prince Harry had truly suffered a health crisis. No one from the Sussex camp denied the reports. No statement came out from Archwell. No photo op surfaced of the couple smiling or strolling hand in hand. Just silence, which, in modern PR terms, is sometimes the loudest response. As more details trickled out, the public began forming its own narrative. Some saw Harry as a man pushed too far by the pressures of fame, family, and internal betrayal. Others began pointing fingers, mostly at Meghan, asking whether her ambitions had come at the cost of Harry's mental health. But amid the noise, one question remained unanswered. What exactly was in those custody documents? While the exact contents remained speculative, multiple sources claim the documents referenced Meghan as the primary parent, with Harry's role labeled as shared residential custody under conditional provisions. One clause reportedly suggested that in the event of separation, the children would reside primarily in California, and any international relocation would require legal approval. Another source stated that communication with the UK press would be legally restricted in the children's presence, a detail that allegedly sent Harry into emotional tailspin, as it reminded him of what he had tried so hard to escape growing up. In private, friends say he felt the walls closing in, that he was losing not just control over his marriage, but over the very identity he'd tried to build since leaving the royal family. He had already lost his titles, his military honors, his homeland. If he lost his children, too, what was left? That's why the fight wasn't just about a document. It was about a life unraveling. It was about the bitter realization that even in Montecito, even with Netflix deals and lavish estates and public adoration, there was no escape from the pain that followed Harry since childhood. The pressure, the scrutiny, the fear of abandonment, all of it converged that night in a single, shattering episode. For Meghan, the fallout may be just beginning. Already, public sentiment is shifting. Social media threads are filled with hashtags accusing her of manipulation, of ambition that outweighs empathy. Others come to her defense, pointing to Harry's own history of emotional volatility, to the immense pressure she's faced as a biracial woman in both the royal family and the global spotlight. But for Harry, none of that noise matters anymore. Because for the first time in a long time, he wasn't making headlines for walking away from something, not a royal title, not a public event, not an interview. He was making headlines for something far more human. He broke. In that moment, raw, unfiltered, and terrifying, maybe the turning point not just in his marriage, but in the entire story of who Prince Harry really is. The air was thin. Or at least, that's how it must have felt to Prince Harry in the moments before his collapse. He was moving quickly, almost frantically, through the side path that cut across the northern boundary of the Montecito estate. His bare feet slapped quietly against the stone pavement, his hoodie clinging to him, sweat soaking through the thin cotton. His hands trembled, clenched and unclenched repeatedly as if trying to grasp something intangible, control, maybe, or clarity. But neither came. Security footage from the estate reportedly shows him pausing once, leaning against a tree, his chest heaving as he stared out into the hills. A few more steps. Then he fell. According to a source close to the security team, it happened fast. 1 minute, Harry was upright, clearly distressed but mobile, and the next, he was on his knees, arms folded inward across his chest, body hunched forward as though bracing for impact. His breathing had become erratic, loud enough for the guard trailing him to break protocol and rush forward. The prince was gasping, clutching at his ribs. His skin, though it was a cool night, had broken into a sheen of sweat. When the guard reached him, Harry was murmuring unintelligibly. One word repeated several times: stop. The bodyguard, a former Special Forces operator trained in trauma response, recognized the signs immediately. This was not a seizure, not a cardiac arrest. It was a panic attack, one of the most severe he had ever witnessed. But for Harry, in that moment, it must have felt like death itself. Panic attacks are often misunderstood by the public. They're brushed off as dramatic reactions, mental weakness, overreactions to emotional stress. But the physiological reality is brutal. The brain floods the body with adrenaline. The heart races, pounding against the chest wall with such force that victims often think they're having a heart attack. Breathing becomes shallow, erratic. Vision narrows. Skin tingles. The mind spirals into chaos, thoughts fragment, time distorts, and every second feels like drowning. And that's what Prince Harry was experiencing, not in some war zone or media ambush, but right there, on his own property, under the stars of a Californian sky. The bodyguard radioed for immediate medical assistance. The clinic they had on standby, a discreet, private emergency facility located less than 10 minutes away, was notified. A black SUV, unmarked and driven by a private medical transport service, arrived in under 5 minutes. In that brief window, Harry was carefully laid flat on the backseat of the SUV by his protection officer, who kept talking to him slow, repetitive, reassuring phrases. Not commands, just grounding anchors. You're safe. It's okay. You're here. I'm here. Breathe. When they arrived at the clinic, the medical team was already waiting. 2 staff members opened the back door and assisted in transferring the prince inside, shielding him from any exterior camera views. Though the clinic prided itself on confidentiality, standard protocol required at least a preliminary ID confirmation. His name wasn't used. He was admitted under an alias, coded by his security detail and known in advance by the clinic director. Inside, the clinic moved fast. First came the vitals. Blood pressure, dangerously high. Heart rate, unstable. Breathing, shallow and intermittent. His pupils were dilated, his skin pale. They administered a beta blocker to slow his heart rate, followed by oxygen to stabilize his respiratory distress. Then came the battery of tests, not to diagnose panic, which was obvious, but to rule out more sinister threats. Electrocardiogram, full blood panel, chest X-ray, neurological assessment. They weren't taking chances, not with a man of his stature, not with a patient who had just dropped from apparent cardiac distress. It took almost an hour before they ruled out heart failure. The scans came back clean. The blood test showed nothing abnormal aside from elevated cortisol and adrenaline, hallmark signs of a fight-or-flight overload. In short, Harry had experienced a full system collapse triggered by emotional overload. A breakdown. A storm of fear, betrayal, stress, and physiological response, all compressed into 20 harrowing minutes. A senior clinician, reportedly trained in both emergency medicine and psychiatric response, sat with Harry for almost 2 hours afterward. The setting was private, with dim lighting and soundproof walls. No white lab coats. No clipboard interrogations. Just calm, grounded conversation. It was in that quiet, under the soft hum of ambient air conditioning, that Prince Harry is said to have spoken about what led him there. According to someone familiar with the session, Harry opened up gradually. He talked about the fight, about the document, about the words that were exchanged, words he reportedly wished he could take back. He talked about his children, about Meghan, about the feeling that the life he had built was slipping away through his fingers. But most of all, he spoke about fear. Fear that he was becoming like his father, emotionally distant, unable to hold on to the people he loved. Fear that he was repeating a cycle he had sworn to break. Fear that all his efforts, leaving the family, moving to America, starting fresh, were collapsing under the weight of a truth he hadn't wanted to admit. That he wasn't okay, and perhaps hadn't been okay for a long time. The clinician, trained in trauma-informed therapy, reportedly reassured Harry that this was not weakness. That panic attacks are not a failure of character but a symptom of prolonged emotional stress that, in his case, had been compounded by decades of suppressed grief, institutional expectations, and relentless public attention. They discussed triggers, the loss of Diana, the trauma of war, the years spent trying to navigate between duty and authenticity, the sudden shift from royal protocol to celebrity chaos, the endless speculation about his family, his marriage, his children, the betrayal he felt, not just from Meghan's legal draft, but from the world he had tried to trust. And in that sterile, dimly lit room, it all spilled out. Not in royal speeches, not in press releases, but in broken sentences, tearful pauses, and moments of raw confession that few ever associate with royalty. This wasn't Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex. This was Harry, a man who had run out of defenses. Back at the estate, word slowly spread that Harry was safe, but not well. Meghan was reportedly informed by a direct call from a member of the security team, not the medical staff. She asked if she could visit the clinic. She was told that it would be best to wait, for now. Those close to her say she went quiet after the call. She locked herself in her room, refused all staff entry, and declined her scheduled Zoom appearance that morning. No statements were issued. No tweets. No Instagram stories. Just silence, both from her and from Archewell. When Harry was discharged the next morning, just before sunrise, he wasn't brought home immediately. According to reports, he was taken instead to a separate property, a safe house owned by a close friend and supporter of the couple, where he could rest without triggering another media frenzy. He stayed there for 2 nights under close observation, and when he finally returned home, things were different. The house was quieter. The staff moved more carefully. The couple reportedly avoided each other for most of the day, communicating only through intermediaries, a security chief, a personal assistant. There were no joint public appearances, no statements refuting media claims, no effort to dispel the narrative. Because for once, the narrative was real. Harry had collapsed. Not metaphorically, not politically, not in the court of public opinion, but physically, emotionally, entirely. And in doing so, he had revealed the cracks beneath the glossy image of the Sussex brand, the brand that had promised freedom, love, and healing. What happens to a man who has already lost everything he thought he needed, and then starts to lose the very foundation of what he rebuilt? That's the question hanging in the air as Harry tries to recover, not just from the panic attack, but from the realization that he may be standing at the edge of a deeper emotional reckoning. And if this was the breaking point, what will healing even look like? When Meghan Markle received the phone call informing her that Prince Harry had collapsed and been rushed to a private clinic, time seemed to stop. She had been alone in the master suite, reportedly sitting on the edge of their tufted linen bed, staring blankly at the floor. The house was unusually quiet, save for the soft hum of a distant appliance and the occasional creak of wooden floors beneath the weight of silence. The tension in the air was palpable, not just that of a fight, but of something unfinished, something haunting. Insiders claimed that when the call came in from Harry's security detail, not from Harry himself, Meghan's expression hardened first before melting into something more unreadable. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She simply listened, nodded, and hung up without saying much. That moment, that brief window between news and reaction, is one of the most discussed and speculated parts of this story. Because what Meghan did next, or didn't do, speaks volumes about where things truly stood between her and the man she once described as her twin flame. According to a former staff member who requested anonymity, Meghan closed the door to her room and asked not to be disturbed. The staff, already shaken from the night's explosive energy, complied. For nearly an hour, she was alone. No phone calls. No messages. No footsteps. Just silence. Some believe she was crying. Others say she was processing. But a select few, particularly those in media circles with ties to the Sussex's PR operations, suspect something else entirely, that she was strategizing. This theory, as controversial as it may sound, doesn't come out of thin air. Meghan has built a career, a platform, and an entire second life on carefully managing her image, her narrative, and her relationship with public perception. The abrupt nature of Harry's collapse, the medical urgency, and the total lack of control over the narrative would have jolted her into a space she's most uncomfortable in: vulnerability without framing. It's worth noting that less than 2 hours after the incident, her personal attorney in California was reportedly seen entering a private residence used for off-the-record briefings and legal coordination. What was discussed in that meeting remains unknown, but its timing raises questions. Some reports allege Meghan immediately sought to understand the legal ramifications if Harry's mental health decline became public knowledge, particularly in the context of custody and control of Archewell Foundation assets. Others suggest she was simply frightened, not of losing her grip on Harry, but of losing him entirely. Because if there's one thing Meghan has never been accused of lacking, it's pragmatism. At the heart of this confusion is a singular, troubling question. Was Meghan devastated or calculating? To answer that, one must understand her world. For years, Meghan has been caught between love and leverage. Her relationship with Harry was once seen as revolutionary, a mixed-race American actress stepping into the most traditional monarchy in the world, challenging its boundaries. But when they stepped back from royal life, the bond became something else: a brand, a business, a global movement. And in every business, perception is currency. In the hours following Harry's collapse, Meghan reportedly made only 2 personal calls, one to her mother, Doria Ragland, and another to an unnamed contact believed to be tied to their Netflix development team. Neither was to a friend, neither was to the British royal family, and neither was to Harry himself. This detail, relayed by someone familiar with the couple's inner circle, paints a portrait of a woman either paralyzed by guilt or consumed by preparation, possibly both. But her behavior wasn't entirely devoid of emotion. Another staff member reported seeing Meghan pacing the hallway around 3 a.m., barefoot, clutching a silk robe around her waist, her eyes red, her mouth moving silently as though rehearsing something. A conversation? A statement? An apology? No one knows. But she looked haunted, not by scandal, but by uncertainty. Because despite all her control, all her planning, there was one thing she hadn't accounted for: Harry breaking down. He wasn't supposed to. Not like this. He was the warrior prince, the survivor, the steady hand behind their joint interviews, their charity visits, their Spotify and Netflix deals. If he couldn't handle the pressure anymore, what did that say about the empire they'd built together? And worse, what did it say about her role in that breakdown? When sunrise approached and word began leaking to the press, Meghan didn't spring into PR action. She didn't deny. She didn't post. She didn't even call a meeting. She withdrew. By 8 a.m., Archewell staff reported receiving a brief message from Meghan's assistant: "The Duchess will be unavailable today." No explanation. No follow-up. For a woman known to meticulously script even her lowest moments, that absence of response was either chillingly strategic or a rare glimpse of genuine emotional collapse. But then, late in the afternoon, something shifted. A small group of staff noticed a change in tone. Meghan began reviewing media coverage. Not actively, but through flagged summaries provided by her media liaison. She allegedly asked for a rundown of what angles were gaining traction: sympathy for Harry, blame on her, or neutral speculation. The answer, overwhelmingly, public sentiment was with Harry. This, reportedly, is when Meghan became visibly distressed. She feared one thing above all: becoming the villain. The Yoko Ono of the royal family narrative. The woman who dragged Harry into Hollywood, only to discard him the moment things got hard. The woman who built an empire off trauma but couldn't stop her husband from collapsing under it. That narrative, right or wrong, was beginning to form. Her advisors reportedly suggested immediate damage control, a soft appearance, perhaps a casual photograph with Harry once he returned home. Something to assure the public they were united, that Meghan was by his side. But Meghan said no. According to a top aide, she refused to perform grief. She didn't want to appear disingenuous, or worse, exploitative. Whether that decision came from principle or pride remains unclear. Privately, she made contact with a therapist Harry had worked with in the past. The call was short, according to sources, more an inquiry than a cry for help. She asked what she could do. The answer: give him space. And for the next 48 hours, that's exactly what she did. She didn't go to the clinic. She didn't issue a statement. She didn't appear publicly. And while some praised her for respecting Harry's privacy, others criticized her for staying silent when the man she claimed to love was in crisis. But love, in their world, is rarely simple. What's becoming increasingly clear is that Meghan Markle, for all her poise and media savvy, was blindsided by this collapse. Not because she didn't see Harry's stress building, but because she never imagined it would manifest so violently, so physically, so publicly. And perhaps that's why she went quiet, not to protect her image, but because she was, for once, truly lost. In the days that followed, she reportedly initiated a therapy session of her own. Not in California, but via remote access to a London-based therapist familiar with high-pressure marriages and celebrity isolation. That session, according to someone close to her, was the first time she cried in front of a stranger in years. She talked about fear, about losing control, about the weight of the world they had created. She didn't ask for sympathy. She asked for clarity. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the scrutiny, beneath the scripted statements and stage-managed appearances, there was still a woman, a mother, a wife, and now, possibly, a partner who had pushed things too far. The question remains, was it intentional? Was Meghan preparing to leave Harry behind? Or was she simply reacting to years of pressure, media attacks, and emotional fatigue? The truth is likely somewhere in between. What we do know is that in the hours and days after Harry's collapse, Meghan Markle faced a reckoning she had long managed to avoid. Not a public scandal, not a media feud, but a private truth. That the man she loved, the man she built everything with, had reached a breaking point she couldn't spin, control, or deny. And now, for the first time in their highly choreographed life, Meghan had to face something unscripted. The phone call reached Clarence's house just after 7 a.m. London time. King Charles had already been up for hours, as he often was, reviewing briefing notes over a modest breakfast at Highgrove House. The call was not from Harry, not even from Meghan, but rather from a discreet liaison within the Sussex's private security team, someone trusted enough to relay urgent news without triggering a full-scale media alert. According to palace insiders, the king took the call in silence. No visible reaction, no exclamation, just a slow nod and a tightening of the jaw. When the call ended, he placed the receiver down gently, turned to his aide-de-camp, and said only one thing: inform William. Now, behind the calm of those few words was a storm. Though the public image of King Charles is one of control, stiff upper lip, ceremonial gravitas, and detachment, those who've worked closest with him say he is, at his core, a deeply emotional man. The trouble is, those emotions are buried beneath decades of palace training, royal protocol, and the suffocating pressure to never, ever appear vulnerable. But in this case, it was personal. His son, the very son who had accused him of neglect, who walked away from the monarchy, who aired their family grievances on Oprah and Netflix, had collapsed. And worse still, it wasn't from physical illness, but from psychological overload. Some say Charles blamed himself. Others say he blamed Meghan. But what's clear is that he acted swiftly. Within the hour, confidential calls were placed not just to William but also to Princess and Prince Edward, the four senior royals who have, since Queen Elizabeth's passing, formed the spine of the new royal apparatus. A private teleconference was organized under the highest level of discretion. There would be no record, no staff present save for one security note-taker, and no mention of the call in the court circular. What was said in that meeting has never been made public. But multiple palace sources, speaking off the record, have hinted at the tone and content. Prince William, upon hearing the news, reportedly turned pale. He had been estranged from Harry for over 2 years, their last interactions marked by tension and mistrust. But as much as he distanced himself, the collapse hit him hard. It was no longer about rivalry, no longer about duty. It was about blood. "He's still my brother," William reportedly said during the call, voice tight, shoulders stiff. Princess, and known for her unflinching pragmatism, allegedly asked the most difficult question of the call. How much worse does it get before someone steps in? It wasn't meant as a challenge. It was a statement of concern, a recognition that whatever line had previously separated the family drama from true crisis had now been crossed. King Charles, for his part, did not call Harry, nor did he call Meghan. He opted for silence, not out of coldness, but out of fear that anything he said would be leaked, twisted, or weaponized. Instead, he issued a directive through back channels. Harry was to receive every support he needed, including access to trusted physicians, therapists, and security, all funded privately. No questions asked. It was a rare moment of unconditional care, but also one tinged with helplessness. Because as much as the royal family could provide resources, they could not repair what was broken. Privately, Charles reportedly reviewed psychological evaluations from royal physicians who had, in the past, expressed concern over Harry's well-being. Even in his early 20s, Harry had been described by family doctors as emotionally wounded but high-functioning. A young man who bore the trauma of Diana's death like a stone in his pocket, always there, always heavy. And now, decades later, that weight had finally crushed him. Meanwhile, Prince William found himself battling a different kind of guilt. For months, years, even, he had taken a hard line against Harry, refusing to meet, refusing to reconcile, privately calling the Oprah interview poison, publicly maintaining his distance. And yet, beneath the decorum, he reportedly carried a deep sadness over their rift. When the news of Harry's collapse reached him, he didn't lash out. He didn't blame Meghan. He blamed himself. According to a former courtier, William reportedly confided in a senior member of his staff. Maybe if I just picked up the phone, maybe this wouldn't have happened. Kate Middleton, the Princess of Wales, was also briefed that morning. She had long been wary of Meghan, not out of malice, but out of instinct. The two women never truly bonded, and Kate, according to close friends, often felt that Meghan viewed the monarchy as a ladder to fame rather than a commitment to tradition. Still, when she heard about Harry's hospitalization, she reportedly grew tearful. Her own children adored their Uncle Harry. George often asked when he would come back. Charlotte remembered his jokes. And for Kate, Harry had once been like a younger brother, mischievous, loyal, and kind. She reportedly told William that afternoon, he needs family now. Not press. Not statements. Just family. But herein lies the problem. The royal family, by design, is not good at intimacy. They issue memos, not hugs. Coordinated appearances, not spontaneous visits. Even in crisis, their first instinct is to preserve the institution, not to comfort the individual. Which is why, despite the concern, no senior royal boarded a plane to California. No one appeared on Harry's doorstep with flowers or food or letters. The support came in the form of infrastructure, money, connections, medical contacts. Not in the form Harry had longed for since childhood, affection. Back in London, advisors debated whether to issue a public statement. One draft was written, a carefully worded expression of concern from the king, framed around mental health awareness and the importance of compassion. But Charles rejected it. It will be seen as weakness, one aide paraphrased his reasoning, and it will feed the circus. Instead, the palace issued no comment. The same strategy they had used after Oprah, after Spare, after every Sussex-related firestorm. But for once, the silence felt louder than ever. Public speculation began mounting. Was the royal family indifferent? Were they cold? Or were they simply out of their depth, unable to reconcile private love with public scrutiny? In truth, the answer lies in a quiet in-between space. Because privately, members of the family were shaken. Deeply. Prince Edward reportedly broke protocol and sent a personal message to Harry through a mutual friend. No official crest, no palace seal. Just a simple handwritten note expressing support. Princess and requested updates through private intermediaries, refusing to allow another Diana situation to unfold without intervention. Her phrasing was deliberate, intentional, because that's the fear no one says aloud in royal circles, that history is repeating itself. A young royal, consumed by media, isolated by fame, betrayed by institutions meant to protect him, now spiraling toward emotional collapse. The parallels with Diana are not just poetic. They're terrifying. And as much as the monarchy, tries to distance itself from scandal, it cannot escape the shadow of its past. Which is why, in private, a growing number of senior courtiers have begun asking an unthinkable question. What if Harry doesn't come back? Not physically, but emotionally. What if this collapse is the beginning of his permanent retreat, not just from royal life, but from his own identity? And if that happens, what then? Does the monarchy absorb the shame? Do they blame Meghan? Or do they look inward and finally ask, what role did we play? Because even if Meghan was the spark, the fuel was decades of silence, repression, emotional negligence dressed as duty. In the coming weeks, palace insiders believe there will be quiet efforts made to reconnect. Private calls, discreet messages through mutual friends, perhaps even an unofficial visit by a trusted cousin or longtime friend. But no one expects a reconciliation overnight, because when trust is broken at this level, between a family and one of its own, the path back isn't paved in press releases. It's paved in honesty. And honesty has never been the monarchy's strong suit. So for now, the palace watches, waits, and hopes that this time, silence doesn't come too late. To understand the weight Prince Harry carried into that fateful night, the night that ended with him collapsed on the ground, gasping for air, you have to go all the way back to the defining fracture of his life. August 31st, 1997. The tunnel in Paris. The flashbulbs. The screams. The Mercedes-Benz S280 twisted into a coffin of metal and flame. And the unbearable phone call no child should ever hear. Your mother is dead. Harry was just 12 years old. That age when a boy starts to pull away from childhood but still clings to it. That age when a mother's presence is not a luxury, it's a compass. Diana was gone. And not just gone, but taken in a way that burned trauma into his psyche with the fury of 1,000 cameras. She had been hunted, stalked, chased into death by a media machine that would, years later, turn its focus on him and the woman he loved. That trauma, deep, unresolved, and raw, became the silent passenger in Harry's life. He spoke little of it publicly until years later. But those who knew him closely during his teenage years described a shift. The cheeky boy became angry, defiant, then quiet, then reckless. School suspensions, drinking, tabloid scuffles. He once confessed that he used to punch walls and feel nothing, that he'd go days without speaking, that he couldn't cry, even when he wanted to. What the public labeled as royal misbehavior was in many ways an untreated psychological cry for help. But in the royal family, help comes in the form of decorum. His emotional turbulence was met with protocol. When Diana died, no family therapist was summoned. No grief specialist was flown in. Instead, Harry was made to walk behind her coffin, stoic, restrained, watched by millions. That procession through the streets of London is now seen as one of the most disturbing images in royal history. A child forced to grieve in silence, stripped of the right to collapse, to scream, to rage. It was only years later that Harry admitted the truth. I was very close to a complete breakdown on numerous occasions. But back then, the facade held. In his 20s, Harry found something that gave him purpose and control: the military. He joined the British Army in 2005. There, under the rigid structure of military life, he felt order for the first time in years. He trained, deployed, and saw combat in Afghanistan. He wore a uniform that didn't say Prince. It said Captain Wales. It grounded him. For a time, it saved him. But war doesn't heal trauma. It just changes its name. In Afghanistan, Harry found himself both soldier and symbol. His identity, a royal in a war zone, made him a target. He was evacuated once due to security threats. And though he performed with courage and discipline, the emotional scars followed him home. He spoke later about how loud noises would trigger flashbacks, how helicopters flying overhead would flood his chest with anxiety, how he'd wake up in cold sweats. Post-traumatic stress disorder was never publicly diagnosed, but the signs were there. When he left the military, the transition was brutal. Purpose turned to confusion. Order turned to chaos. He threw himself into philanthropy, Invictus Games, African charities, mental health campaigns. But behind the scenes, the old shadows returned. His panic attacks became more frequent, his anger more unpredictable, his isolation more profound. And then came Meghan. Meeting her in 2016 changed everything and nothing. On the surface, she seemed to be the answer to everything he'd longed for: understanding, love, rebellion against the confines of royalty. They connected quickly, deeply, with shared trauma as a glue few could understand. She had also faced public ridicule, betrayal by family, and media invasion. But beneath the passion and partnership was a ticking clock. Because Harry didn't enter the relationship as a healed man. He entered it as a wounded one. And while Meghan supported him in many ways, encouraging therapy, emotional openness, even spiritual exploration, she also became part of a new storm. Together, they took on the British media, the monarchy, and tradition itself. Together, they built a brand on pain turned into purpose. But brands can't carry emotional burdens, and relationships cannot heal decades of trauma alone. In 2019, during the infamous ITV interview in Africa, Harry admitted publicly, "I still haven't processed it all," referring to Diana's death, the constant triggers, the press, the pressure. That confession was a rare window into a man on the brink. He didn't say he was broken. He said he was bending. Still, the world celebrated their bold choices, leaving royal duties, moving to America, signing multi-million-dollar deals. Oprah, Netflix, Spotify, the Archwell Foundation. On the outside, it looked like triumph. But inside, Harry was unraveling. Close friends described the years between 2020 and 2023 as increasingly turbulent for him. He felt isolated from his past, disoriented in his present, and unsure about his future. The marriage, while passionate and intimate, was reportedly strained by media scrutiny, lawsuits, and the relentless need to monetize their narrative without losing credibility. Insiders say Harry often expressed doubt privately about the life he had built, that he missed the military, that he missed the simplicity of life before fame, before loss, before the institution of the crown and the machinery of Hollywood fused into a single, unstoppable force. He worried constantly about being misunderstood, about being mocked, about losing his children to a life of cameras and image control. He began exhibiting signs that therapists recognize as complex grief, a mixture of childhood trauma, compounded adult loss, and identity confusion. And like many men in crisis, he hid it well. Until he couldn't. The panic attack that sent him to the clinic in Santa Barbara wasn't an isolated event. It was the culmination of everything he had carried for nearly 30 years. The unspoken grief of Diana, the battlefield anxiety, the post-palace identity collapse, the pressure of being husband, father, brand, activist, and symbol all at once. In psychological terms, what Harry experienced was called a cumulative breakdown. Not the result of one fight, but of 1,000 small injuries to the soul, each one unacknowledged, each one silently bleeding into the next. The triggering event, Meghan's alleged legal document, the fight over custody, was just the match. The house had already been soaked in gasoline. And now, for the first time, the prince who had built his adult life on the idea of breaking free from a toxic system realized he hadn't broken free at all. He had just built a new cage with different bars. Therapists familiar with his story say his collapse was inevitable. One likened it to a dam bursting. You can only reinforce it so long before the pressure wins. So what does recovery look like for a man like Harry? It's not a week at a clinic. It's not a PR reset. It's not a photo op in front of a new charity project. It's reckoning. With his past. With his choices. With the pain he never got to fully express because he had to protect an institution. Then a wife. Then children. Then a global narrative. What comes next, whether healing or more chaos, will depend on whether Harry is finally willing to stop running, to stop performing, and to start confronting the one enemy he's never fully faced, his own pain. This section will examine the internal struggle Meghan Markle may be facing in the wake of Harry's collapse, between genuine emotional concern and the instinct to protect her image, brand, and control over their public and private lives. In the immediate aftermath of Prince Harry's panic-induced collapse, Meghan Markle was thrust into a silent war of impulses. One part of her, the wife and mother, stood horrified by the sight of her partner emotionally unraveling. The other part, the strategist, the brand guardian, the survivor of countless media firestorms, was already calculating the ripple effects. And caught between those two selves was a single question. Was this a moment to fight for love, or to preserve control? By all appearances, Meghan was shaken. Staff at the estate noted her withdrawn demeanor, her decision to cancel public engagements, her unusual silence on digital platforms. This was not the Meghan the world had grown used to: bold, assertive, forward-facing. But the question on everyone's mind wasn't just how she felt. It was what she would do next. Because Meghan, perhaps more than anyone, understood what was now at stake. This wasn't simply about a fight. It wasn't just another squabble or even a tense family moment caught behind closed doors. This was public. It was documented. It had spread worldwide. For the first time, Harry's vulnerability was on display in real time, and Meghan's role, whatever it might have been, was now part of the global conversation. According to sources close to her team, she was told in no uncertain terms that her next steps would determine whether the public saw her as a supportive wife caught in a tragic spiral, or a calculated partner willing to emotionally push a fragile man past his limits. The stakes had shifted, and Meghan, for all her experience with public perception, found herself in a game she couldn't entirely control. The internal conflict was layered. On one hand, Meghan had always insisted on protecting her narrative. Since marrying into the royal family, she had endured an extraordinary amount of media hostility, much of it tinged with racism, misogyny, and xenophobia. Her instinct to seize control over her image had been forged in fire. From the carefully curated interviews to the exclusive documentaries, Meghan had built a brand that centered around strength, reinvention, and resilience. Vulnerability, when showcased, was always presented through a lens of agency. But now, Harry's vulnerability was unscripted, raw, frightening, and it painted a portrait of their inner life that conflicted with the polished imagery they had spent years building. And so, those close to Meghan say she became increasingly isolated, not just from the public, but even from her own inner circle. Some advisors wanted her to go public, to speak out with compassion, to show emotional availability. Others warned her to keep quiet, to let the media cycle pass before making any moves. In the middle of this whirlwind, Meghan reportedly found herself staring down the harshest reality of all. That she might lose both the man she loved and the public trust that had once rallied behind her. Her defenders argue that she was trapped in an impossible position. If she spoke, she risked being accused of exploitation, of spinning Harry's collapse into a sympathy campaign. If she remained silent, she would be seen as cold, distant, or worse, indifferent. Every choice came with a shadow. And for a woman who had already been cast as a villain by large sections of the British press, the burden was immense. Yet, critics were quick to point to another pattern, one that raised uncomfortable questions. In recent years, Meghan's public moves had often aligned with carefully timed media narratives. The Oprah interview, for example, aired just as tensions between the Sussexes and Buckingham Palace reached their peak. The Netflix documentary, Harry and Meghan, was released in the wake of increasing speculation about their financial independence. The Archetypes podcast dropped precisely as rumors of Meghan's political aspirations began to swirl. In each instance, vulnerability was framed through empowerment, but it was also monetized. That's why some observers began to question whether Meghan's response to Harry's collapse was guided more by emotion or by image. One insider claimed that Meghan had already begun discussing, behind closed doors, how to reshape the public conversation, to reframe the couple as victims of external pressure rather than internal dysfunction. If true, this would not be the first time that the Sussex media machine mobilized to reclaim a narrative. But the timing, so soon after a medical emergency, raised concerns. And then there was the matter of the custody documents. Though Meghan reportedly denied that she had made any legal moves without Harry's consent, multiple sources close to the couple confirmed that a legal draft had been circulated internally, outlining a possible custody structure in the event of a separation. Meghan maintained that it was merely exploratory, a precaution given the mounting pressures on their marriage. But for Harry, that explanation came too late. The fact that such a document even existed raised a darker possibility that Meghan had already been preparing, in some form, for a future without Harry. Whether as a protective measure or a strategic fallback, the presence of that legal plan cast a long shadow over her claim to unconditional support. It's also worth noting that this wasn't the first time Meghan had been accused of seeking control over their public and private life. In past reports, she was described as the driving force behind the couple's exit from royal duties, the architect of their US-based ventures, and the more assertive half of their decision-making team. While Harry often appeared emotional and passionate, Meghan was portrayed as deliberate, sometimes to the point of inflexibility. That characterization may be unfair, but perception, especially in the court of public opinion, can be more powerful than fact. And right now, the perception was shifting. Even within progressive circles, where Meghan had once been embraced as a feminist icon challenging the monarchy, there was a growing discomfort. Why hadn't she appeared at Harry's side post-collapse? Why was there no message, no footage, no acknowledgement beyond closed doors? Had the fight truly been so severe that reconciliation, even in crisis, was impossible? Some speculated that Meghan feared becoming emotionally entangled in a situation she could no longer manage. That watching Harry fall apart was too painful. That she didn't know how to respond because for all her strength, she hadn't faced something like this before. Others claimed the opposite, that she was waiting to see which way the public tide would turn before deciding on her next move, waiting to assess her options, waiting to determine whether her role in Harry's breakdown would be framed as accidental or intentional. Either way, she was paralyzed. That paralysis was evident in her absence from the public eye. In the days after Harry's collapse, Meghan canceled scheduled engagements, declined interviews, and withdrew from the spotlight. Her Archwell team was told to stand down temporarily. Behind the scenes, however, activity continued. According to someone with knowledge of her inner circle, Meghan initiated a private legal consultation about reputation management. The focus of that meeting? How to mitigate fallout if the media began painting her as the catalyst behind Harry's panic attack. At the same time, she allegedly reached out to Harry's therapist, not for therapy, but for advice. She wanted to understand what she could do, what to avoid, and how to make space for Harry's recovery without exacerbating the tension. The call was described as tense but sincere. It's possible, then, that Meghan was trying to do both, protect Harry and protect herself. To be present while remaining cautious. To step forward without stepping into a trap. But time was not on her side. The longer she remained silent, the more damaging the narrative became. And while Harry recuperated in private, the world began asking questions she couldn't afford to ignore. Did Meghan push him too far? Was this the cost of their rebellion? And could a marriage built on shared trauma survive when one partner cracked beneath the weight? For Meghan, this was no longer just a media crisis. It was a personal reckoning. She had fought to control her story from the moment she stepped into the royal spotlight. But now, she was part of a story she didn't create, one that was unfolding in real time, one she couldn't control. The dilemma was no longer just strategic. It was emotional, human, because love, at its core, isn't about controlling the outcome. It's about showing up in the chaos. And for Meghan Markle, the next chapter may determine whether her fight was for control or for something far more fragile. Tonight, we uncover the terrifying truth behind Prince Harry's reported hospitalization after an explosive late-night fight with Meghan Markle. Sources say the argument spiraled out of control after Harry discovered secret custody documents, and what Meghan said next triggered a full-blown panic episode. Rushed to a private Santa Barbara clinic, Harry's condition was described as serious, his blood pressure spiking, unable to breathe, emotionally shattered. Was this a breaking point? And what does it reveal about the cracks inside the Sussex marriage that no one saw coming? Stay with us. We've got insider accounts, unseen timelines, and emotional revelations that may change everything you thought you knew about Harry and Meghan.